I just helped my neighbor carry boxes, and she told me I should carry her next. The day started like any other, sunlight spilling softly through my window, warming the hardwood floor. I was grabbing my morning coffee when I noticed movement across the street. My new neighbor, a woman in her early 40s, was struggling with a stack of cardboard boxes. Her posture was graceful despite the effort, and there was something quietly commanding about the way she moved, confident, self-assured, yet with a subtle vulnerability that made her seem profoundly human. I hesitated for a moment, my own instincts whispering that I should stay in my comfort zone. But there was an urge I couldn't ignore, a desire to help, to be present in a small, meaningful way. So I grabbed my shoes and crossed the street, calling out, "Hey, do you need a hand?" Her head turned, and for a brief moment, the world felt like it slowed. Her smile, warm, easy, a little teasing, made my chest tighten with a mixture of admiration and nervousness. "I could use some help," she said, her voice calm but carrying a rhythm that was almost melodic. We started moving the boxes together. My hands brushed hers more than once, fleeting touches that sent unexpected warmth up my arms. The boxes weren't heavy, but somehow they became a reason to linger, to share space, to notice details I might otherwise have missed. The way sunlight caught her hair, soft golden highlights framing her face. The faint, comforting scent of her perfume. The effortless way she balanced the boxes while keeping her footing on the uneven driveway. As we worked side by side, we exchanged small talk. But even in those casual words, there was a quiet intimacy forming. I noticed the way she laughed. A brief, understated sound that made me smile without realizing it. I caught glimpses of vulnerability too, the subtle hesitation in her movements when she shifted the heaviest box. I wanted to make it lighter for her, to make this small act feel safe and shared. Finally, we set the last box down. She took a step back, brushing her hands lightly on her pants, and looked at me with that same warm smile, eyes holding a spark that made me feel both noticed and slightly exposed. Then, with a teasing glint, she said, "You should carry me next." I froze, caught between surprise, embarrassment, and a thrill that I hadn't expected from simply moving boxes. It wasn't a flirtation in the crude sense. It was playful, confident, and somehow deeply human. Her words hung in the air, and in that brief silence, I realized that something subtle but undeniable had shifted. A connection had been made, unspoken but present, charged with possibilities I wasn't ready to name yet. As I walked back home later, I found myself replaying that brief encounter. The warmth of sunlight, the feel of the boxes, the brush of her hand, and that teasing smile. I couldn't help but wonder what it meant, or if it meant anything at all. But one thing was certain, this wasn't going to be just another ordinary day, and she wasn't just another neighbor. Something about her presence had reached deeper than casual acquaintance, and I had a feeling I was about to find out exactly how much. After the brief, teasing comment, "You should carry me next," my mind refused to settle. I walked back toward my apartment with a strange mix of amusement and self-consciousness, replaying her words over and over. It wasn't just the humor in her tone. There was something in the way she said it, light and effortless, yet carrying a subtle undercurrent that made my stomach twist pleasantly. The next day, I found myself watching for her, almost without realizing it. Life continued as usual. Errands, work, the mundane rhythm of my small world. But each time I glanced out the window, there she was again, watering her plants, arranging boxes on the porch, or simply stepping outside to take a breath of morning air. Each time, the memory of her teasing suggestion lingered, and I caught myself smiling like an idiot. Later that afternoon, I happened to step outside with a package, and there she was, struggling again, this time with a slightly heavier box than yesterday. I paused, debating internally whether to offer help or play it cool. Before I could decide, she looked up and smiled, warm, inviting, the kind of smile that made hesitation feel almost absurd. "Hey," she said, "looks like you might be needed here again." I moved closer, taking the edge of the box with her, feeling the familiar brush of her hand against mine. It was brief, almost accidental, but enough to make my chest tighten and my thoughts scatter. "I got this," I said, trying to sound casual, but my voice betrayed a slight nervousness. As we carried the box together, she laughed softly, a sound that seemed to settle around us like a warm, invisible blanket. She made a small comment about how ungraceful I was being with the box. Teasing, light, playful, and I laughed along, feeling both embarrassed and exhilarated. There was an easy rhythm between us now, a shared understanding that didn't need explanation. After we set the box down, she leaned lightly against the doorframe, arms crossed, eyes sparkling with a hint of mischief. "You know," she said softly, "if you keep helping me like this, I might just start expecting more." Her words lingered, teasing but layered with something deeper, an invitation disguised as humor. I realized I was suddenly hyper-aware of her presence. The subtle sway of her stance, the soft tilt of her head, the way the sunlight caught the highlights in her hair. I found myself imagining what it would feel like to simply be closer to her, even for a moment longer, and that thought sent a curious warmth through me. We ended the encounter with a shared laugh and a casual farewell, but the energy between us had shifted. It wasn't just neighborly kindness anymore. There was a tension now, delicate and unspoken, that made ordinary gestures, the brush of hands, a glance, a shared smile, feel charged. As I walked away, I felt the stirrings of something new. Admiration, curiosity, and a quiet, thrilling awareness of attraction. And though we didn't say it outright, I sensed that the playful challenge she issued yesterday, "Carry me next," wasn't just a joke. It was a doorway, one I found myself wanting to step through more than I would ever admit. After that playful suggestion, life seemed to arrange little coincidences that made it impossible not to see her. At first, it was small things. Crossing paths on the sidewalk while taking out the trash, a brief wave while checking the mail, or noticing her tending to her plants in the soft morning light. Each encounter carried a subtle rhythm, a quiet familiarity that wasn't forced, but felt inevitable. One afternoon, I found her struggling to carry a grocery bag that had split at the bottom. Without thinking, I stepped forward. "Let me help with that," I said, reaching out to steady it. She looked up at me, her eyes catching the sun, warm and amused. "You're really good at showing up at the right time," she said lightly, a playful edge to her tone that made my chest tighten. As we walked the bag to her kitchen, the space between us felt charged, but not in a way that made either of us uncomfortable. Our shoulders brushed lightly, and each accidental touch seemed to linger a second too long. I found myself paying attention to the way she moved. The easy grace in her step, the soft sway of her hair as she turned her head, the gentle tilt of her hand when she adjusted the bag. These were details I could not unsee, subtle rhythms of a person becoming memorable in my mind. We laughed at the minor chaos of groceries spilling and boxes teetering, and in those shared moments, something quietly significant began to grow. I started noticing her quirks. The little exhale she made when she concentrated, the way she hummed softly when arranging something just so, the warmth in her gaze when she caught me noticing. She was confident, yes, but in those casual moments, her vulnerability peeked through. Not as a flaw, but as a quiet invitation to notice, to connect. We began leaving casual notes for each other sometimes, small gestures. A package at her doorstep, a smile exchanged across the hallway, creating a pattern that was intimate without words. I realized that these little encounters were becoming the highlights of my days, each one pulling me deeper into her orbit. One evening, I lingered on her porch while she watered her plants. The golden light of sunset cast a soft glow around her, making her appear almost ethereal in the fading warmth. She looked up and caught me staring, or maybe just noticing, and smiled, a small, knowing smile that made me aware of how close we were without having to speak. My heart raced, but there was also a quiet serenity in that moment, a realization that connection didn't always need declarations. Sometimes, it lived in shared space, shared effort, and shared laughter. By the end of the week, I found myself feeling protective, concerned for her comfort, and eager to see her again. I was aware now that what had started as neighborly courtesy had quietly transformed into something more tender. A slow, unfolding recognition of her presence, a desire to linger in her company, and the first stirrings of emotional attachment. Even in these casual encounters, the playful energy of her earlier words, "You should carry me next," lingered in my mind, a teasing echo that hinted at possibilities I was only beginning to imagine. It was a subtle, magnetic pull I could neither resist nor fully understand, and I was starting to hope I never would. It started as an ordinary evening, but there was a quietness in the air that made everything feel more intimate. I had stopped by her apartment under the pretense of returning a borrowed tool, but it quickly became clear that neither of us was in any rush to leave. She invited me to stay for a cup of tea, and I accepted, aware that this was one of those rare moments where ordinary gestures carried weight beyond their surface. We settled into the living room, her space reflecting her personality, warm, organized, with subtle touches of life and memory scattered around. Framed photographs, potted plants, a neatly stacked pile of books that suggested both intellect and quiet hobbies. The soft hum of a ceiling fan and the muted golden light of the late afternoon made everything feel intimate, almost cinematic. For a long moment, we sipped our tea in companionable silence. Then, she spoke, her voice softer than usual. She told me about her life. A story of recent changes, moments of solitude, and the challenges of balancing independence with the quiet yearning for connection. She wasn't dramatic. She wasn't seeking sympathy. She simply shared, as if trusting me with pieces of herself that were usually kept private. I listened carefully. Every gesture she made, the way she traced the rim of her cup with her fingers, the slight hesitation before she looked me in the eye, spoke volumes. I found myself leaning in slightly, not to intrude, but to convey attentiveness, a silent reassurance that her words mattered. "I'm glad you're here," I said quietly, feeling the sincerity in my own voice. Her eyes softened, and she smiled. Not the playful smile of teasing or flirtation, but something warmer, quieter, vulnerable. For a moment, the air between us was charged with unspoken understanding. Our hands rested close on our laps, separated by a mere inch, and the smallest brush of her sleeve against my arm felt electric, awakening awareness I hadn't yet fully acknowledged. The conversation turned to lighter topics, but the intimacy lingered. We laughed softly at small anecdotes, but each laugh was layered with something deeper. The recognition that connection wasn't always about grand gestures, but about presence, attention, and trust. I noticed the faint scent of her perfume, the way her fingers absently played with the edge of her teacup, and the calm strength in her posture. It all conveyed a complexity and depth I found myself increasingly drawn to. As I prepared to leave, there was a pause, a gentle, almost imperceptible hesitation in her movement. Our eyes met, lingering a fraction longer than usual, and in that shared gaze, there was acknowledgement that something meaningful was developing between us, fragile yet undeniable. She didn't reach for my hand, nor did I, but the unspoken understanding was clear. This was more than casual neighborly interaction. This was the beginning of emotional intimacy. Walking back home, I replayed the evening in my mind. I realized that attraction wasn't just physical. It was woven into these moments of quiet trust and vulnerability. That playful line she had said before, "You should carry me next," took on new dimensions. It wasn't just flirtation anymore. It hinted at connection, curiosity, and perhaps the promise of something deeper. And for the first time, I felt a genuine anticipation, not of what might happen next physically, but of the growing closeness between us. A closeness that could change both our lives. It was another ordinary afternoon that somehow didn't feel ordinary at all. I had stopped by her apartment to return a small package she'd left with me the day before. She was rearranging some kitchen shelves, moving pots and jars with quiet precision, and I offered a hand without really thinking about it. As we reached for the same jar of olive oil, our hands brushed. Just a fleeting touch, light and almost accidental, but it made the air between us feel charged. I felt warmth spread up my arm, a subtle tension that made it impossible not to notice. She paused for a moment, her eyes meeting mine, and there was a flicker of acknowledgement. Not startled, not flirtatious in a crude sense, but curious, intimate, and human. "Sorry," I muttered. my voice a little higher than usual, though there was no real need for apology. She shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips. "It's okay," she said softly, and I noticed the gentleness in her tone. A quiet invitation to linger in the moment without words. We resumed arranging the shelves, moving in an unspoken rhythm. Every brush of her hand against mine as we passed objects, every step closer than necessary to reach a jar, carried a subtle electricity. I found myself acutely aware of the space we shared. The soft sunlight falling through her kitchen window, the faint scent of fresh herbs she had recently planted on her balcony, the slight hum of the refrigerator in the background. Each detail felt amplified, magnified by the intimacy of our proximity. At one point, she leaned forward slightly to reach a high shelf, and I instinctively stepped closer to steady her. Our hands met again, this time with more intent, lingering just long enough to make my heart skip a beat. She glanced up, her eyes soft but steady, and in that fleeting gaze, there was understanding. Neither of us needed to define what we were feeling, yet both of us knew it was there. We laughed lightly when a jar slipped from my hands, the tension breaking just enough to remind me that these moments didn't have to be perfect, only shared. But beneath the laughter, the subtle romantic tension remained, woven into the air around us like an unspoken secret. Each accidental touch, each brush of our hands, carried weight because it was real, human, and delicate. By the time I left her apartment, I felt a strange combination of exhilaration and calm, the kind that comes from being seen and understood without words. Walking home, I replayed every detail. The warmth of her hand, the soft weight of her proximity, the quiet strength behind her smile. I realized that these small, seemingly trivial touches were slowly building a deeper connection, one that went beyond friendship, beyond playful teasing. And as much as I wanted to pretend it was just chance, I couldn't ignore the growing awareness that each touch, each glance, was pulling us closer. A slow, deliberate gravity that neither of us could resist. That playful suggestion from the beginning, "You should carry me next," echoed in my mind differently now. It was no longer a joke. It was the beginning of a real, tangible attraction, wrapped in gestures that were gentle, meaningful, and completely YouTube-safe. That evening, the air carried a gentle chill, soft enough to remind us that summer was giving way to autumn. I found myself stopping by her apartment again, this time under the pretense of returning a small package she had left in my care. But both of us knew there was more to this visit than mere errands. The quiet tension that had been building over days of shared moments, brushes of hands, and lingering glances was now almost tangible. She opened the door, her smile immediately softening the edges of my nerves. "I didn't expect you," she said, though her tone suggested she had. There was a warmth in her eyes, a subtle acknowledgement that this wasn't just a casual encounter anymore. I stepped inside, noticing the familiar comfort of her apartment, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the aroma of freshly brewed tea, the soft glow of a lamp illuminating the corners of the room, and the little details that made the space uniquely hers. We settled into the living room, her presence somehow both calming and electric. Conversation flowed easily, but beneath the surface, both of us were acutely aware of the quiet distance between casual friendship and something more. We laughed at small anecdotes, exchanged teasing remarks, but every glance and every gesture carried an undercurrent of emotion we had yet to name. At one point, she reached for a cushion, and our hands brushed again. This time, neither of us pulled away immediately. Instead, we let the contact linger, a silent acknowledgement of what had been quietly growing between us. My heart beat a little faster, not with panic, but with recognition, that these moments were no longer accidental. They were meaningful. "I feel comfortable with you," she said softly, almost as if testing the waters. Her eyes met mine, steady, open, and warm. More than I expected I would. The words struck me with a quiet intensity. I realized that I had been feeling the same way, that the moments we shared, the small touches, the laughter, and even the playful teasing had been weaving an invisible thread connecting us. "I feel the same," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Being around you, it just feels right. There was a pause, a shared inhale, a moment where the world seemed to shrink to the space between us. And then she leaned slightly closer, not to initiate anything overt, but enough for me to feel the subtle warmth of her presence, the softness of her hair brushing my arm as she adjusted her seating. I instinctively reached out, lightly touching her hand, a gesture gentle enough to be casual, but intentional enough to convey what words could not fully capture. We shared a quiet smile, eyes holding each other in mutual understanding. No grand confessions were necessary. The playful challenge from the beginning, "You should carry me next," now carried new weight. It wasn't just teasing anymore. It was a promise of closeness, a recognition of shared desire, and an unspoken agreement that we were both willing to explore it. As the evening drew to a close, we walked toward the doorway, our hands brushing once more before a soft, deliberate hold. Neither of us let go immediately. The warmth lingered, the tension softened into comfort, and in that moment, it was clear. The slow, unfolding intimacy between us had become real, mutual, and unmistakably alive. The evening air was cool, carrying a soft autumn scent that hinted at change. I had lingered longer than necessary on my way over to her apartment, replaying the past few weeks in my mind. Every encounter, from the playful "carry me next" remark to the gentle touches and shared laughter, had built into something far more profound than either of us had expected. I wasn't just a helpful neighbor anymore, and she wasn't just a friendly presence in my life. We had become part of each other's daily rhythm in a way that felt quietly essential. She opened the door with that same effortless grace that had captivated me from the beginning. Her smile immediately put me at ease, warm and knowing, hinting that she felt the same anticipation I did. I stepped inside, noticing the familiar glow of her apartment, the subtle scent of tea and fresh flowers mingling with her perfume. All of it comforting, intimate, and distinctly her. We settled into the living room, the golden light casting soft shadows across the walls. Conversation flowed naturally, yet there was a deeper understanding in every glance, every pause. The playful tension from earlier encounters had transformed into a calm, steady closeness. It was a slow, deliberate intimacy that didn't need words to be felt. At one point, she leaned back slightly, brushing her hair behind her ear, and I realized I was acutely aware of her presence. Her warmth, the soft cadence of her voice, the way her eyes crinkled slightly when she smiled. I reached out, lightly touching her hand in a gesture that was both innocent and significant. She didn't pull away. Instead, she intertwined her fingers with mine, a simple yet profound acknowledgement of what had been quietly growing between us. We talked about small things, plans for the weekend, upcoming chores, favorite books, but beneath the mundane, there was a deeper connection. Every laugh, every glance, every shared silence carried weight. It was as though the world outside had melted away, leaving just the two of us, aware of the bond we had formed and the possibilities it held. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but certain. "I've been thinking about us." Her eyes met mine, steady and warm. "I like this. I like being with you." My chest tightened in a way I had grown familiar with over the past weeks. "I feel the same," I said. "I don't know exactly what the future holds, but I want to see where this goes with you." There was a pause, a shared breath, and then she leaned forward just enough for our cheeks to brush. A gentle, YouTube-safe touch that spoke volumes. I smiled, holding her hand a little tighter, feeling the quiet comfort and electric warmth of mutual understanding. As I left her apartment that night, we walked together to the edge of the porch. Our hands stayed linked until the last moment, and even then, we lingered, sharing a quiet smile. The playful remark from the beginning, "You should carry me next," now felt like the starting point of something meaningful, tender, and real. That night, I realized that life's small gestures, a shared load of boxes, a brief touch, a lingering glance, could grow into deep emotional connection. We weren't just neighbors anymore. We were two people, fully aware of each other's presence, stepping gently but intentionally into something new, warm, and profoundly alive. And in that quiet, lingering moment, I knew we had arrived at something worth holding. Together, for now and maybe for a long time to come. If you enjoyed watching this slow burn story unfold, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more heartwarming age gap romances. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced a connection that started with something as simple as helping a neighbor?